Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of Solar Now in the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And I'm your host, Ronald Bethea. And you know, if you join us on a regular basis, the slogan for this show, if there's power in numbers and the Positive Change Purchasing Corp LLC captures that power for your financial benefit. The Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative LLC serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American owned renewable energy companies to address the higher energy at our historically black colleges and universities, to utilize black owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also, to educate the African and African American community locally and nationally about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio programs such as Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Also, ladies and gentlemen, you know, today's date is May the 7th, 2025, and we're all blessed to be here and still living and alive. Well, you know, if you join us on a regular basis, this show is also brought to you every week by the National Association of Blacks in Solar, which is a 501c3 organization. I will have some information about our new website for that organization in the very near future. I serve in the present capacity as chairman of the board of directors for the National Association of Blacks in Solar. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have any scheduled guests today. We had invited one of our board members, Mr. Will Shirley, from who's based out of Jackson, Mississippi, but we didn't get a response back from Mr. Shirley. I'm hoping everything is all okay with him and his operation there, Sundial Solar in Jackson, Mississippi. Well, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are here on the platform of Solar Now in the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And as I've indicated, if you join us on a regular basis, you also know that the show is brought to you every week by the National Association of Blacks in Solar, which we've indicated, and the Black Sports Legends Foundation, HBCU Radio Talk Show Initiative. And you can get more information on that initiative, ladies and gentlemen, by logging on to our website at positivechangepc.com. You want to click on our donate button and you'll find more information there about the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative LLC HBC Radio Talk Show Initiative. And you're listening to that initiative over the Positive Change Online Digital Radio Television Network. And we are, as you know, streaming live over our new YouTube channel, as well as this can be heard over the platform of Podbeam Radio, which can also be heard over all our social media gallery, which includes Instagram, Facebook, X, Twitter. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, as I've indicated, we don't have a scheduled guest today, but we have a very, I think, exciting show for you. And we have taken the time to outline some very important articles that we're going to be sharing with you today here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And in our leadoff article, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be leading off talking about, in our leadoff topic, which is a very interesting article, which was done by Admin Azar, and it was published on May the 1st, 2025, in a very, I think, informative online news blog entitled Inside Climate News. And he talks, that leadoff topic today, ladies and gentlemen, will be Consumer Watchdog accuses regional grid operator of overcharging Marylanders for power. The Maryland office of the People's Council, the state's consumer watchdog, has filed two major complaints against regional power grid operators, arguing its market and infrastructure planning rules are systematically overcharging Maryland electric consumers to subsidize services and infrastructure benefiting other states, particularly the state of Virginia. The OPC complaints citing the 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 monitors finding estimated that the auction flaws, the execution of power plants, and other capacity market barriers contributed to over $7.6 billion in excess charges. Prices in the BGE zone, which is the Baltimore gas and electric zone, reached $466.35 a megawatt day, according to the complaint. Beyond the auction failures, OPC, the Office of the People's Council of Maryland, particularly objected to the PJM. Now, if you're not familiar with the PJM, ladies and gentlemen, let me take a little time to explain what the PJM is, because we like to make it very, very plain here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America to our listening audience. As a dear friend that's no longer with us, Joe Madden, we knew him as the Black Eagle, used to say, we go plain so the goats can get it. The PJM is composed of 13 states. It starts with parts of North Carolina, the state of Virginia, the District of Columbia, state of Maryland, state of Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York, parts of Illinois, and Ohio. These are the 13 states which comprise about 20% of the U.S. population, about 65 million. And have a close to over 360,000 consumers of natural gas that reside in those 13 states, District of Columbia. And this is what this issue is all about, ladies and gentlemen. And you're going to find out that they have direct relationships with the present administration, which I refer to as DT, as a damn tragedy for leadership as a president. When we refer to this individual as COVID 45 plus 2 with 34 felony coming straight at you, you know that person as Donald Trump and his administration. And I am looking at the correlation between the energy companies and the lobbyists, and who in fact funded whose campaigns as relates to these entities and how they interact with the energy sector and the political sector in this country. These are things that we break down here on the program of platform of Solar Now in the future with its economic impact on Black America, because there is a substantial economic impact that will impact all Americans, but particularly disproportionately because of the division of wealth, have a devastating impact on what as African Americans are referred to as marginalized communities in America because of the disparity of income. Now, let's look at this. Beyond the auction failures, the OPC also separately objected to the PJM's proposed cost allocations for approximately $6 billion in new transmission infrastructure projects. These projects are particularly driven by the forecasted growth of electricity demand for data centers in Northern Virginia. Despite the growth occurring outside of Maryland, the OPC said that the PJM rules would saddle, and I'm not talking about a saddle that you put on a horse. I'm talking about something that's going to be put on Maryland residents who are ratepayers with nearly $800 million in costs. Let me be clear, ladies and gentlemen. This article indicates that we're going to be receiving an $800 million cost hit on our natural gas rates because of these data centers, which are being powered by natural gas. Now, this is a ongoing national issue. This morning, I had the privilege of listening to Greg Palast, who talked about the 2024 election and the fact that you had over 4 million votes that were disqualified, mail-in votes that were disqualified in this past election. And he talked about the use of AI, which we know that as artificial intelligence, in how and what role it played in the purging of votes from the voter rolls. Now we can see the relationship of how we are paying for our own political demise when we pay our gas, water, and electric bills through the funding of these data centers with illegal charges, according to the Office of the People's Counsel in the state of Maryland, which is responsible for protecting the ratepayers. Okay? Now, I'm looking at all of the advocacy organizations, such as the Maryland Clean Energy Center, which serves as the Green Bank in the state of Maryland. I'm looking at the Montgomery County Green Bank. I'm looking at Evergreen Action. I'm looking at a host of 501c3 nonprofit organizations that are in the green space, advocate around environmental justice issues. My question is, I'm not hearing enough conversation about these data centers and the impact that they are having on putting a much greater demand on the grid in the marketplace. Now, this particular article was done in Climate News, and it did address that somewhat. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to continue to sort of drill down on this particular article as it relates to our conversation this morning in our first segment of our show. And we have a timeline that we want to make sure that we stay upon, and we're going to try to stick with that timeline, but we want to make sure that people are very, very clear about this scenario. Now, I gave you a brief reading and synopsis of what and how we're going to be impacted by this. But in one complaint with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which was filed jointly with Illinois and New Jersey agencies, the state of Maryland Office of People's Counsels targets the PJM interconnections for 2025 and 2026 capacity auctions of July of 2024, which price surged to $269.92 a megawatt day, a staggering increase from, you ready for this? $28.92 for a megawatt day in the previous auction. We're talking about 1 year. That's almost a 200% increase, ladies and gentlemen. And we're seeing this on our gas bill and electricity bills here in the state of Maryland, which I am a resident of that. So this is not something that I'm making up. This is a reality, and I can pull my own electricity bill and gas bill, and I can read from that, and you'll find that I'm paying for very, very, very little of what I'm actually using. All these fees on the bill basically is paying for the transmission, getting that gas from point A to point B. Well, as we say in the street, it sounds like a personal problem for me. If I have a business model and my big business model says, okay, I have to get this product from point A to point B in order for me to service my clientele. Well, that's my responsibility. That's not the end user's responsibility. That's the business model I'm having. But see, we're dealing with legal monopolies in this country. And I want to jog most of your memories. It has not been that long. Trump has been in office 100 days. But right before during the election process, he called a number of billionaires to the Oval Office, and all these companies and these stakeholders were in the energy industry, and basically said to the fossil fuel industry, y'all put $1 billion up and you can do what you want to do. I'm not making this up. This can be factually substantiated, and I can come up with information and the dates and the times. But when we fast forward, not that far in the distant future, how about May 7th, 2025? we will find out that this thing has come full circle very quickly. Now, according to the complaint, the overall auction costs increased from 2.2 billion to 47.7 billion in a single year, producing an unjustified spike in expenses for consumers. The grid serves 13 states and the District of Columbia. I want you to marinate on that. Now, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to sort of switch gears and look at other subject matter because we've broken our show down in that type of format today so we could cover a number of subject matter things that are still related and relevant. So what we're going to do now, ladies and gentlemen, we're about 3 minutes over our timeline. We want to look at an article that was done by Marianne Lavelle and Peter Alves. This was published also on 1st, 2025, inside the same online publication, inside News. EPA funding cuts target disadvantaged communities, analysis shows. Now, disadvantaged communities can be white communities, Hispanic communities, African American communities, Native American communities. There are a lot of different ethnicity in those disadvantaged communities. So we're not just talking about black folk. But once again, we're talking about disproportionately, when we look at the division of wealth in this country, who's going to get hit the most. This particular article goes on to indicate in its bid to resist a court order to unfreeze grants, the Trump administration reveals a laser focus on eliminating environmental justice aid. More than $2.4 billion is targeted for termination. The Environmental Protection Agency's declaration said it is terminating a total of 781 grants. It is unclear how the agency came up with the large number. The EPA press offered this clarification. No clarification. That's what it says. No clarification on this matter. Now, but we're going to look at this number of grants, and we're going to look at how they were targeted. I think that's very, very important. And as we begin to look at that targeting, citing, and pending litigation, there were some 23 states with the District of Columbia U.S. attorneys that have filed lawsuits surrounding this money that has been frozen. I am aware of the fact through some of our contacts with some of the entities that were awarded grants that the funding has been put of the money has begun to flow from EPA down to those entities that were already vetted, have already signed contracts. There were 60 entities under the Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and inside that initiative, it was $27 billion. $20 billion of that was broken down into one fund, which was with Citicorp Bank, and those, what we would call CDFIs, which are banks, credit unions, and organizations, nonprofit organizations, have provided funding for renewable energy projects in those rural communities that have struggled over the years and been left behind as they move forward with moving since the administration, the green, new so-called green economy, which the Trump administration has targeted to try to destroy. Looking at targeting environmental justice, some $2.4 billion in environmental and climate grants awarded by the Biden administration are now on the chopping blocks. Based on an EPA filing with the federal courts on April 23rd, Inside Climate News calculated the planned cuts based on the money awarded but not yet distributed will over 99% of which was obligated to help disadvantaged communities. Okay? Programs, environment and climate justice, community change, 103 grants. Planned cuts, $1,489,503,000. They're going to cut, ladies and gentlemen, from the environment and climate justice community change grants, environmental justice thriving community grants. There were 20 grants. Planned cuts, $645,799,676. Surveys, studies, investigations, and environmental justice, there were 24 grants, totaling $148,846,913. These are grants which have already been awarded to entities, but the Trump administration, even though executive orders by federal judges have already said that this money should begin to flow out of the federal agencies, they have decided that they're not going to follow the law. Environmental justice government to government grants. There are 98 grants, $85,496,537 in grants, which are on the chopping block. Environmental justice collaborative problem-solving grants. There were 124 grants in this pool, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking $45,577,319. These 124 grants are also included reducing embodied GHS in construction materials. It was one grant representing $6,703,990. Environmental justice for small grant programs, 12 grants, $940,000 964,965 is that number. There were 12 grants inside of that Environmental Justice Small Grant Program. Community support and address environmental justice, 2 grants totaling $130,238 for a grand total of $2,422,512,858. That's how you came up with the $2.4 billion in targeted cuts. So now that you know how much money was being cut, well, the next question is who stands to lose and who stands to gain? Well, here on this platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America, only one program not directly related to environmental justice is being terminated. It is aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacturing of steel and other construction materials. Although the Biden-Harris administration said it intended to fund 38 organizations with nearly 160 million under this program, the INC analysis showed that just one grant worth 6.7 million was awarded before the Biden left office. See, this is the problem, ladies and gentlemen. I started talking about this issue with the Department of Energy, specifically their EJE office, quite some time before the Biden and Harris administration left office. Matter of fact, Mr. Antoine Thompson, who is the director of the Greater Washington Clean Cities Collaboration Group in Washington, D.C., sent letters to the White House concerning this issue, that they needed to codify Executive Order 14006, which was the executive order which Biden signed, the first thing he did when he came to office, which created the Invest in America agenda, which gave rise to Build Back Better, which had 66,000 infrastructure projects, and the Inflation Reduction Act, which had $1.7 trillion in funding, which a lot of that funding is the money I'm talking about right now. This money was awarded to different entities, but the money never got out of the door. So, looking at what has taken place in this timeline, Michael Regan, who served as the head of EPA under the Biden and Harris administration, and first African American to hold that position. And I have to give a shout out to Aggie Nation because he's a North Carolina A&T alumnus. Realized that, and he parked $20 billion with City Core Bank on deposit in the name of those grantees that had been awarded those grants. And it was outside of the physical coffers of EPA. But the $7 billion for the initiative known as the Solar for All program, which was supposed to assist 900,000 low and moderate income residents nationwide get PV systems, which are solar systems, on their roof through a pilot program that started here in Washington, D.C. in 2011, which was started by Mr. The brother is named as Darrell Green. He is an NFL Hall of Famer for the Burgundy and Gold. You also had present member of the D.C. Public Service Commission, and his name will come to me shortly, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be calling his name with Mr. Mark Davis with WDC Solar, which is one of the founding members of the National Association of Blacks in Solar. They started the Solar for All pilot program here in Washington, D.C. in 2011. Yours truly, who I attended many a meetings and advocated that this program be picked up nationally, and it was. The Biden and Harris administration did, in fact, adopt the pilot program, and $7 billion was put into that program. And that is where the funding came for that money, and funds came from the pilot that was started here under the Department of Energy and Environment here in Washington, D.C. With that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're looking at only one program. And as I've indicated, there were 38 organizations, nearly $160 million. And under that program, the analysis showed that was done by Inside Climate News that one grant for $6.7 million out of $160 million actually got out the door. All told, more than 99% of the awarded money that Zealand has targeted for termination is related to environmental justice. Slightly more than half of the funding cuts will come in Democratic congressional districts. But some Republican districts also are seeing big hits because Zealand is targeting programs that provide large grants for tribal communities. Now, I think that's very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, that we look at those communities who have suffered the blunt of environmental injustice by coal-powered plants and these gas turbines being built in their communities, such as the one that's been built in Southwest Memphis, Tennessee. And people can go to our website and you can listen to an interview that was done by Roland Martin on his show, Roland Martin Unfiltered, as he interviewed Tory Harris from the 91st District out of Memphis, Tennessee. And he talks about the environmental impacts on the air and consciousness for the building and permitting of a AI plant. It's not the plant itself, it's how Elon Musk, who headed DOS, chose to power the plant and not put caps on the top of those furnaces, burning that natural gas and the poisonous carcinogens that have escaped into the air, which the rate of cancer has exploded. Building of the transmission lines of some $6 billion and $800 million of that being passed on to Maryland ratepayers in the state of Maryland. And this data center these data centers are being built in the state of Virginia. But because we are all here in the DMV area, the District of Columbia, with over 700,000 residents, will be impacted. And the state of Maryland, with 6 million in residents, we're going to be impacted by this. Not talking about the data center that's supposed to be built not too far from where I reside here in Tacoma Park, Maryland, in Greenbelt, Maryland. We haven't even started talking about the cost associated with building those transmission lines. I was just on a webinar, which was put on by the Maryland Clean Energy Center, talking about those transmission lines and infrastructure that is being built, and nobody talked about the cost and who was going to absorb that cost. And that's what we're talking about, the economic impact and on America, but specifically African Americans, since we, by design, have been put in a place when, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, in 2020 fiscal year 23, $864 billion went out to minority contractors. 200 billion comes off the top, went to the Pentagon. They did not provide the numbers for the percentage of African American minority certified businesses doing business with the Pentagon. But it did give a breakdown of for the 646 billion, which was still left in the coffers, that African American businesses only received 1.5%, which breaks down to 10 billion out of 646 billion. Hispanics received 1.8 billion. Native Americans, Indians, and received 2%. 80% of that 79, or we'll round it off at 80%, went to white women. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I can see how people can go and vote against their own interests on a lot of issues, because it's all about follow the money, follow the money, follow the money. Now, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America, we wanted to keep it moving because we wanted to look at what the Federal Regulatory Commission has said, and the Office of the People's Counsel, with their final findings in this around this subject matter, before we move on to another subject matter in today's podcast. If FERC cannot resolve the matter in time, it should order refunds to be processed retroactively once the issue is settled and complaints added. OPC broader warnings is that unless the PJM rules are connected, Maryland customers will continue to face systematic overcharges. The agency argued that the stakes go far beyond this year's billing and touches on long-term integrity and fairness of the regional electricity markets. There is widespread concern among state ratepayer advocates about the impact of data centers. Labs said who is the director, in his comments, we are all under resource relatively to utilities, generation companies, and data centers themselves. Where can we be coordinating our efforts? This is a fight that's on and is ongoing, ladies and gentlemen. With that being said, Now, we're going to, as we said, we're going to switch gears on subject matter as it relates to those EPA cuts to those disadvantaged communities. Now, we were in having that discussion, ladies and gentlemen. I was talking about those targeted communities that are going to receive the cuts. We talked about how much money and what programs was going to be would be impacted, but in the number of grants, it was at a total of $2.4 billion and 781 grants. But the 10 top districts that will be impacted by EPA grant cuts, although slightly more than 52% of EPA planned grant cuttings would eliminate funds for work in Democratic congressional districts, some Republicans also will face big hits, according to this article, in part due to targeting of large grants for tribal entities Alaska, Michigan, and Minnesota. Oh boy, that's quite interesting, ladies and gentlemen. How the Trump administration would target native lands and native people, and basically they've stolen the whole damn country from the Native Americans. It's interesting how people think, and they want people not to understand their history. And he's calling it DEI and wokeness. Ain't got nothing to do with it. Let's call it for what it is. It's institutionalized racism being perpetuated by the Trump administration. Let's look at the economics behind this. District of Arkansas, this is a Republican district. Nicholas Begich, who's a Republican, there's 12 grants that's going to be impacted in this district, totaling $151,889,542. Can we say 151 million in Alaska, North Carolina? Valerie Forshee, this is a Democrat. 4 grants will be is slated on the chopping block, totaling 127,058,766,000. That's a lot of cheddar, ladies and gentlemen, when you're talking about North Carolina receiving $157 million in 4 grants. She's a Democrat. Pete Stober, a Republican, 7 grants, and he represents Minnesota. 89,157,149. That's a lot of cheddar for Minnesota, as we call our good old U.S. tax dollars. Texas. Now, we're talking about District 18, and right now they don't have a representative there, so I guess they're saying it's vacant. But it was slated to receive 5 grants for $80,379,191. For Massachusetts, James McGovern, Democrat, 6 grants totaling $80,279,506. Vermont, Becky Balliant, 68 grants, 68,038,000. We're talking about PR, which would be district, which is Pablo Hernandez, which is, I think this is going to be up in Democratic District, Providence, Rhode Island, Democratic, 9 grants, $62,761,615. Minnesota, you're talking about Bill, last name Huizega, who's a Republican, 6 grants, $62,360,943. And California, Julia Bronsby, Democrat, 2 grants, $59,007,201. These gives you a breakdown of what districts and who were slated to receive this funding, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that people can agree with me that this is a travesty that you're having this many communities impacted by these cuts. Now, we're going to keep it moving, and we're going to switch gears and change subject matter because we're a little bit behind our timeline on our subject matter as it relates to our timeline here on the platform. And we're going to talk about something that's sort of dear to my heart, which is my alma mater, Morgan State University. And Morgan has recently received the School of Architecture and Planning was awarded $1.4 million in a grant to advance campus-wide energy planning initiatives. Now, I've reached out to Dr. James Hunter in the School of Engineering to ask him if he would be a guest on our show, and we're still struggling with trying to get a response back. But I'm going to acknowledge the fact that on this platform that we did in fact reach out to Dr. Hunter. Now, the School of Architecture and Planning, SA Plus at Morgan State University, Maryland's predominantly public urban research university, has been awarded more than $1.4 million in new grant funding to advance clean energy planning, innovation, and curriculum development across the campus. The funding includes $1,315,000 from Maryland Energy Administration Higher Educational Clean Energy Grant Program, $100,000 through the Maryland Industrial Partnership MIPS program, a collaborative academic industrial initiative, and $30,000 grant from the 2025 Nicholas Fund for Lighting Education. This investment will support a range of initiatives focused on green strategies, research collaborations, and infrastructure upgrades, positioning Morgan as a leader in campus development rooted in sustainability. The SA Plus P will lead the disciplinary efforts with the university stakeholders, external collaborators, implementing the transformative energy solution aligned with the state and federal sustainability goals. That's real fluffy word salad without naming those entities. We have, in fact, reached out to Dr. James Hunter so he could come on this platform and sort of explain what this language means in this press release that's been put out by my alma mater. I'm a proud Morgan State University and I bleed orange and blue. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to close out our show today. We're going to talk about the Greater Washington Region Clean Cities Collaboration's spring and summer events, which will be coming up here in the DMV market area. And in doing so, ladies and gentlemen, they're going to be having an annual golf outing, which will be in the 7th month, 25, 29, 7th month, 9th day, 25, at Lake Presidential Golf Course. And on 5/21/25 this month, they will be hosting a employment job fair at 8099 North Capitol Street, Northeast Washington, D.C. And those are the two events that we wanted to share with our listening audience here today on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the close of another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. I hope that we brought you news that you could definitely use here on the show today. And, as we always say, we don't want you to meet us back here. We want you to beat us back here as we close another exciting edition of this show, Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, that this show is brought to you every week by the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative, LLC, which serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically Black colleges and universities. To also utilize Black-owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also to educate the African and African American community locally and nationally about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio programs such as Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm your host, Ronald Bethea. And as we always say, we're not the greedy here, but we are definitely the needy. So we would greatly appreciate if you could log on to our website at Positive Change, POSITIVECHANGE, P as in Paul, C as in cat.com. That's positivechangepc.com. We want you to go over to our donate button and we want you to click on that. And as I've indicated, we're not the greedy here, ladies and gentlemen. We're definitely the needy because we need some help in order to be able to get more traffic and to improve our SEO marketing efforts to get our website rated higher, ranked higher on the search engines to drive more people to the website, because I feel that this information that we provide, we know is news that you can definitely use, but you can build the greatest mousetrap in the world, but if don't nobody know about it, ain't nobody using it to catch mice. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, To next week, as we always say, we don't want you to meet us here. We want you to beat us back here as we close another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America.